Welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is episode number 200 with Craig Skeffington. Skeff, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. So last time we did this, so you were on like episode 20 something. It was audio only at that time.
Early on, yeah.
Yep. And then we did it in that room over there. And then last summer, we did episode 100.
Yep.
And you kind of interviewed me, and that was fun.
Yeah.
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 So today we're going to be talking about like people's role as a mentor. But the reason we really got together was to kind of listen to 6 of your charts and have people, because I know a lot of people know your name from that who are maybe not around our area. And we want to make sure they know how great your charts are.
Well, you're very kind, and thank you.
You have a ton also that are not published that you're working on getting cataloged and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll write for people, do commissions and stuff as well. So let's just start with like, can they just find you on Facebook? Is that just the easiest way to reach out to you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not we just had this conversation off air. Technically savvy, like the Instagram or whatever. But I mean, I have a Facebook page.
Well, what's important is that you can write.
Yeah.
The charts are great.
Yeah.
That's what's
thank you. For. I mean, if somebody really wants to find me, they can find me.
Yeah.
I'm not hiding.
I did look for CraigSkeffington.com. You've seen that before. It's like an insurance. Craig's Skeffington.
Really?
And it's like this insurance thing.
I did not know that. I do know that Craig Skeffington's an odd name to begin with. Yeah. There's not that many. So I did a search one day wondering, are they Tom Smith, whatever, that would be, a million. There's a Craig Skeffington who was a Vietnam helicopter pilot living in North Carolina. So I emailed him. I found his email and I emailed him. And we had like a long dialogue because he's a Craig Skeffington. I'd never had that. That was weird for me. So anyway.
How do you tell people how to spell your name? See if it's the same.
Yeah, right.
So this past year, you were inducted into the Maine Music Educators Hall of Fame. I nominated you because of everything you've done, and I only know a portion of what you've done, right? Just like you probably only know a portion of what I do.
Sure.
But so the title of this, I think we've decided on mentor, composer, friend, because I wanted to put that in there because you started as clearly a mentor of mine, and you still mentor me in a lot of ways. But we've become equals long time ago because we do the same profession, and that's kind of grown into a friendship. And you probably never thought that when I was 14 years old that I was ever going to be considered to like get this kid out of my life in 3 years and whatever. But
truth be known,
yeah.
I knew you were going to be a music teacher back then. I mean, it was not even a question.
Really?
So that we were talking about my student, at South Portland. I've had kids over the years where you realize you're looking at the mini version of themselves and you can sort of extrapolate where that's going. TL, we were having that conversation like earlier about finding somebody and like kind of bringing them along.
Yeah.
So I think teachers that have been around for a while have that sort of not innate gift, but just ability to kind of, predict. Sometimes you're wrong, but
yeah. But what's amazing to me too, I wanted to come across as like you were not an experienced teacher at that time.
No,
like you had come along, and so there's actually a poem I wrote down. I know neither one of us are really poetry guys, but so if anybody wants to look up John Wooden TED Talk, I don't know if you've ever heard this. It's the best 17 minutes of education you'll ever have as a teacher.
I like TED Talk and I like John Williams as a coach. I don't know
So I wrote this word down because I thought it described, I think, all of us as teachers and as mentors. So let's see if I can read my own handwriting. No written word, no spoken plea can teach our youth what they should be, nor all the books on the shelves. It's what the teachers are themselves. Right. So like, I remember just like, I don't know if you had imposter syndrome when you were trying to like fill the shoes of anybody or whatever, but you just came in and you were like your authentic self. And I just noticed that you worked hard and you cared about us and you cared about the band being good. And that's what kind of drove me to be like, hey, that's pretty cool. And I didn't know I wanted to be a band director until I was a senior. And I kind of said, well, I don't want to leave the band room.
Right.
So I said, well, I might as well, I'm not going to be a performer. I mean, I can play, but that wasn't my love. I just loved the whole part of it. And then that kind of led me down that path. And I was really lucky as a mentor because you came as my sophomore year. And then in college, Andy Boysen came as a sophomore year. So I've had, really good mentors along the way. And like, so what was that? So a lot of people listening are probably starting their first job or we kind of all deal with this, like, how can I mentor? And it's kind of overwhelming, but if you just like boil it down to that, it's just like you be yourself and work hard for the kids and love them.
Yeah.
That's it.
There's an analogy, and I'll try not to mess this up. When you see the duck on the water, duck really calm, but underneath he's churning. So I felt like that first year, I was sort of like the duck, but on both sides. It's like I'm churning like crazy underneath, and up top, I'm like just, and it was a big program. I mean,
Mhm.
a lot of times fresh out of school, you go to some little program and then maybe even move up. South Portland was my first, job, and I had just come out of the military. And I was admittedly like, I didn't really know what I was doing. But thankfully we were talking about mentors, both of ours, but mine at that time, Terry White and Tom Lazat, more so Terry in the early years, because I had Terry in drum corps back in the early 80s. So it was a built-in person I could rely on. Jeff Priest up in Old Town, Pat Mishu in Hamden. So I was always calling, older band directors, hey, what do you do? What is this? So
But even in that, you recognize that you didn't know everything.
yeah,
In fact,
yeah,
you're one of those that realized you almost thought you knew not enough,
yeah,
and you had to learn to like trust your instincts.
right.
To a lot of what you wanted to do, just do it. It's your program. But there's so many young teachers, and I was that at one point too. Like I know everything.
Yeah.
Like no, we're gonna do it my way, and I don't want to listen to anybody older
Right.
than me.
Right. Well, we just had, before the airing of this,
Which we just had a
about,
whole podcast session. We
yeah, seriously, that we should have
recorded
taped
that.
about, running a marching band rehearsal and planning and whatnot. And I think we do things remarkably similar,
Mhm.
but there are some deviations, like your show planning and the involvement of the staff and whatnot. And just for clarification, I involve my staff, but I purposely de-involve me. If there's a moment where I think I'm going to bring this down to like
Yep.
a different level that doesn't need to be,
Yep.
I realize, okay, I'm stronger working in my lane over here. So, yeah, all of what you said is absolutely
I just
correct.
recorded an episode with Joel Denton from Tennessee.
I saw that.
And it's going to come out, I think, just before this episode comes out, or around the same time. I don't know if people listening have heard it or not, but he is like legendary teacher, and all the friends he talks about of programs, they're like the Mount Rushmore band directors that we've like heard, but he's friends with them.
Right, right. It's funny how that we were talking about
Yep.
circles earlier.
Yep.
Yeah,
and he talks about they would come in and hear his band. They say, "Where'd you get that from?" He's like, "I got it from you." He said, "Well, I don't do it that way." He said, "Yeah, I took what you did and I took it from my program, but I did it in a way that was Kyle and Westbrook,
yeah,
versus a way that was Craig and South Portland."
Yeah.
So that like stealing from people is a time honored
imitation
tradition.
is a form of flattery,
right? But don't feel like when you take something from another program and you put it in your program, you have to do it exactly the same way.
Mhm.
Like alter it a bit. Like just this year in marching band, we've always done this thing where the drum major will order the commands, right?
Mhm.
One set, 16 counts, and then we start.
Yep.
Right. Well, this year we are, one of our kids and one of our staff said, "Why don't we have the band repeat that?" At first I was like, "But we don't do, like, that's not how we do it."
Mhm.
It's amazing. Like you hear literally the one set, 16 counts, the entire band, one set, 16 counts, plus one,
Yeah.
plus one, like
yeah.
whatever you want to do it. And so that was a way of taking something we had always done and like kind of altering it depending on the humans and the kids that we had at the time.
Yeah. And again, my mind is like, okay, that's very similar to what we do. And, the whole teaching of start in -1, finish in +1, and then the lecture about the kid goes +11 afterwards. And it's like, that's how people get hurt. Please listen to directions, so yeah.
So you, how many years? 30, 31,
This will be 31.
31. Because I'm 9 years less than you.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of do my math. I had 3 years and then 6 years in school. So
you can plan your retirement like after. Yeah. It's funny.
So you've done 31 years at South Portland High School. Started with a big program that you didn't have much experience, right? And now you've done all this over all these years through hard work and like trying to learn from other people, right? Was there ever a point where you felt like, well, I got this figured out?
Yeah, I mean, I think your own ego is like it happens to everyone. So you get really overconfident. There have always been moments where I was like, hey, this is really happening. And we've both had, really great bands that we were proud of.
But you've also always had people in front of your bands. Like you've never been shy to have somebody come and watch your band.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, I guess what's the saying? Don't read your press clippings. You're not that good, so the band got a gold or won a trophy. I mean, who cares?
Also, don't read the comment section because you're not that bad.
Yes. Well, right. Exactly. Just do you. The older you get, the easier it is to take information. And, when you're young, it feels like you must do this. Okay. But, I'm old enough now that, yeah, that's great, but we're not going to do that. You sift through it, and we all have our own experiences now. The great thing about being old is you just have had more experiences, right? So,
well, one thing I think that's been a key to your success is like your willingness to work hard. and you just did that, and like you were never, you had a quote, is it still on your band room wall? I don't know if it came from a kid or something, but there's like a big poster on your wall, something about like, I'm never going to let hard work be the reason do
Yes.
you remember the quote?
I do. I absolutely. And you pretty much got it. Being outworked is not the reason we'll fail or something like that. It was, you're definitely, so I forget where I got it. I just remember reading at the time. And frankly, it wasn't a music source. I think it was
Right.
it was a sports source. In fact, now that I remember, it might have been like a Bobby Jones golf thing. Go figure. And I was like, that's genius. And I actually took the half hour, printed it up, went down to the library, blew it up into poster size, and then put it up on the wall.
Yeah.
I think gravity over time, I think the thing fell down and I had to get up on a ladder.
Mhm.
And the older I get, the less likely I am to get on a ladder now. So anyway.
Well, it's one of those things that you put in the classroom and like you kind of forget it's there. You have your back to it and but it's a message.
Every kid in the band that's looking up at you is also looking up at that.
When they're like, I don't want to pay attention to Mr. Skeffington right now. What am I going to look at?
Yeah, it's exactly.
I might as well look at something that's good content.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, things like that. And frankly, that's not a great strength of mine. I mean, in that moment it was, but finding like cool posters or like just things like that that are motivational. I'm a little bit like, my dad. I fell and scraped my arm, rub some dirt on it. Let's get going. That kind of thing. And so I think over the years I've become a little bit more appreciative of that kind of thing. So
music has always kind of been center. It's like I think I got that from you too. It's like we're here for each other, but we're here to work on this music and let's work hard on this music. And like I honestly don't even remember. I know it's a completely different time in the 90s, but I don't remember caring about the room. Like, oh, this room maybe doesn't suit me, or it never crossed my mind.
Right. In your era, I mean, that band room was laughably bad. Right. I mean, it was, for anyone, this would be the short version. It was a converted auto shop. You probably knew that. And the pillars that were in there were the columns that divided like Bay 1, Bay 2, Bay 3. And so when I would go to hear the thunder out there, I would have to cue the timpani around the pillars. And so we eventually like moved the but whatever it was. And then in its last year, they pulled all the drop ceilings out and pulled the floor up because there was asbestos. And they said, well, we're not going to do anything for you because they had started the process of building a new school.
Yeah.
So it really was like, this is your room. and then when they built the new band room, like people would go in, this is your room, but for an entirely different sensibility because we went from the worst to the first. Our band room at that time was just glorious.
But the band sounded great in the bad room, and it also sounded great.
Point
in the good
being,
room.
Yes.
So there's two sides to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think people look at like the opulence and like the brand new this, and they assume the band's going to be stellar. And it really has.
They also see, when I see that logo of that band, take Carmel, was like probably the best band in the country, right? Like, see that logo, you think it's going to be spectacular.
Yeah, you have an expectation.
But literally, if you take those 500 kids and remove them and put 500 new kids in with the same logo, they're not the band.
It isn't the logo that
it's the people and the kids that are in there.
Well, we were talking about earlier about just building culture. You might have kids from other schools, but it's what kind of culture are you creating? And I think more now, and I'm sure it's the same with you everywhere. It's like COVID really interrupted the culture, and so if more than anything, I think we're right now is just rebuilding culture.
This is how we do it and why we do it, what we're doing.
What it is. Yep. Yeah. And buy-in, we talk about kids I think I'm going to do football this year. Okay. But for the kids that you don't focus on the kids that are going out to do something else, you focus on the kids that you've got. And this is, we're going to offer this. We're going to make this as good as we can.
And I think one thing that COVID did for us too was made us grateful for what we have too. So like, I think tying back to the mentor thing, I think that's one of those things. Like before COVID, I mean, I was very appreciative of you and all the people who are been my mentors, but I think since then it's like more, and I've seen it more online too. It's like, promoting this whole idea of that, like, we didn't just show up in this form. We're all a work in progress, and we've been formed by other people who've helped us along that way. And I've publicly thanked you and many other people for like being huge influences in my life. And I think that's good that we're recognizing people. And when the reason I nominated you for the Hall of Fame was because, so I've been talking with Jeff the last couple of years, and Jeff goes on the Jeff rants, right?
As he does,
As he does, and you're laughing along the way. But no, the whole idea about like we don't recognize people when they do a great job, and he would even say sometimes we wait till they're dead. It's like, well, what's the, it's nice to know the name, but there's all these people that like if you've done and you've made significant contributions in whatever state or whatever organization, like, in this case it's Hall of Fame, but it could be a bunch of other things, like just turning around and saying thank you, just, because that's all the payment that you need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to get too big into it, but I don't know what level we want to share this, but I was duped into this, as you know. I went because
this podcast session?
No, I willingly signed up for this, the Hall of Fame thing. I went because you told me Jeff was being nominated,
which is not a lie.
No, which is clearly not a lie.
And I only got Jeff there because you were being nominated.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, and it was a great honor, and that you engineered, Carrie and my dad, and the ironic thing is I had left to go to the bathroom when they called
and you hate I hate them, but I think you hate them even more.
Oh,
like
God.
You hate it as much as I hate the beach.
Yes.
You just hate it. And literally you've been sitting through a lot of it and nothing can happen. You're like, you just excuse yourself.
Well, I figured I got enough time to run to the John. I'll come back and Jeff will do, this will be great. Whatever.
And literally they go to announce it and you're gone.
Seriously.
And I stand up and I'm like, stop.
Yeah. So I come into this gigantic room thinking like just surreptitiously, I'm just kind of go back to my seat.
And Jeff's son had come out like, hey, you might have left it a bad time.
He did. That's exactly what happened. So, I mean, I literally had no idea. I mean,
and beforehand, you were going on and on about like, oh, Jeff had no idea. This is awesome. We kept it from him. And we're just like, Joey and I are just sitting there giggling.
Yeah. As a rule, I mean, this is going to sound terrible, but it's honest. I don't go to those things. If I don't know the people, I'm not like really a big crowd party person. I respect the honoring of people, but I just sometimes like big gatherings make me uncomfortable. I mean, even like, I don't know, had you told me I was getting it, I'm not sure that would have ensured that I was going.
Right. Well, and you would rather spend the time with your dad locally there, right? And
we go to Old Town on the deck of the pool and drink warm Rolling Rock. That's what we do, and hopefully that's okay for the session. But that's what it does.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. That was great. It was a great moment. And Jeff figured it out earlier because all of his family showed up and was there and sitting around.
Yeah, and I had let my guard down even more because I'm like, this is like he knows
it's out of the bag.
We can just kind of enjoy
and he's one of the nicest men I know and been a mentor of mine, but he was looking at me like with the fire of 1,000 suns. Like, I hate you, Smith, right now. This is so awkward.
And so I don't know at what level you've told the story to the world through this medium, but for everyone out there, Kyle single-handedly, in the sense of like recognizing people, nominated like almost everyone, and every person you recognized was just spot on. They were just great. Nobody does that. And how would I know that? Because I never go to these things. But I mean, that's just not something that people do. So I hope that more, and that's not MMEA's fault, because I think they're often soliciting for recognition.
And I had never nominated anybody. Like in 21 years, it took me 21 years to do that. And I'd seen the thing before, but I just never, I'll get to it. And I just never did it. And then at the end of the year, I go, wait, why was X not nominated or whoever? And then I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I just do something about it? So
and we teach with a bunch of people that were just stellar at their job for so many years. So it was cool, and to have the family there. That was a couple of years before that I got into the Old Town High School Hall of Fame, which was neat. And that was even more surreal because that was like my 5th grade teacher, just not because they came for me, but they just happened to be there at UMO. And that was really wild, so, and that's on Facebook somewhere where I got up, and unlike MMEA, which I'm glad I didn't have to do, Old Town, I was this thing at UMaine Orono, I was expected to speak. So I had prepared, so anyway.
So are you like me, where like you'd really rather go to your band's concert and like listen to them play and pick up the chairs afterwards and have nothing to do with the speaking and the conducting? Like, I'd almost rather just like let them perform. So
TL had this script, Tom Lazat, enjoy the journey. Right? It's not the destination, it's the journey. I like the rehearsing. I like being bad and like, okay, let's do this. Trombones are back there, third and a half position. No one really knows anything. And it just sounds, what are you doing? You go over to the piano, you know, that work to get it to that level and the light bulb goes off.
You enjoy fixing the car more than driving the car.
It's exactly what it is. So when you go out in public, I mean, the kicking the band off or, you know, concert, whatever medium you're in, that's like the least enjoyable. In fact, I joke with the kids, I don't really like your playing. And they look at me like, well, why would you say that? It says, I'm always like in disaster prevention mode. I'm always like, I know we've done the work. I know you sound good and you're going to kill it. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, they speed up here. Don't let them speed up there. Okay. They're always, you know, that kind of thing. And when it's over, I'm like, wow, that was really great. But even during that moment, when you put it out in public for consumption,
you're not enjoying it.
I didn't really take that. I was like, I'm working. I'm not just like in the moments I've been burned when I'm just like, wow, this is so fantastic. And all of a sudden it just gets really wide and you're like, you know.
That's one thing I think I've said at one point on the episode too, is like, I want to work more on enjoying the music making process.
Yes.
I just don't know how to enjoy it and also be critical when needed.
Yeah.
But I think it's important when you're getting to the performance, be critical as much as you have to, but work on enjoying it. I mean, you got to be there. You're getting paid.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's just, I mean, that's absolutely true.
There's some people who would love to conduct your band, but they don't want to rehearse them, you know?
Well, I mean, so to go full circle on that one question, I think that with my last concert, I'm going to invite you and invite Lisa and maybe Terry and some people have been just everyone's going to conduct a Jen Fletcher for sure. And everyone's going to conduct a piece. And I'm literally going to be there in jeans and a t-shirt. And I'm going to be there sweeping the stage after and wrapping cables and doing whatever. And so
you can do it the way you want. That's
absolutely.
For sure. So you've also been teaching all these years, but then also you've been writing even longer than that, right? Like you were writing before you were a band director. So you've been writing a really long time.
Yeah, probably 40 years now.
And you can tell when you listen to music that like, you know, you have the experience as a teacher. You don't just write something and say that's good. Right. And we've talked a long time ago about like writing second tenor parts and like getting it played live. So then you realize how terrible this part is and rewriting. So when people need to know if they're playing some of your music, that, you know, that you come from there. Tell me if I'm wrong, but the majority of your known works and published works are in like the grade 3, 4. Do you have much of the 1, 2?
No.
Or 5?
Most of my stuff is grade 2.5 or 3.
Okay.
Some 3.5. There might be like a 4.
Yep.
I think I have 25 with 4 different publishers, which I'm very proud of, humbled actually. So I suppose it's a good time to say, I thought that my earlier writing when I was in the service and then when I was on just pro bands and the area rehearsal bands were very self-serving. They weren't for kids. They were for pro bands and the trumpet parts were super high and super screechy, and mostly because I played lead trumpet at the time.
And then we played some of those in high school.
Right. Which was, again, just dumb, you know, so.
But I only got to play high because you said you got to play high. I went, okay.
Yeah. I mean, and so I've always been the benefactor of like really good musicians at South Portland bailing me out of over programming. You know, there's the year, La Suerte de los Tontos, T.O. and my one, whatever, like all these pro level charts that now I would, what were you thinking? So the older I've gotten, I try to make anything I write accessible, so there's no, and you can be good and still be accessible. I think that was the thing when I was younger. Well, you can't play grade 2.5. That's beneath us. And that's such an egotistical way to look at consuming music, but also writing music. So it's more of a challenge to like come up with an idea and then say, okay, how am I gonna orchestrate that idea in a way that will make sense for the majority of kids that.
But again, if anybody's listening, they're like, well, I have a grade 2 band. Can I reach out to Skeff and like ask him to write a chart for us?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's a great challenge. And
so how about this? Maylinda Boynton, the great young teacher up at Mad Knockout, asked me to do a concert band commission. And, I'm primarily known for jazz band music. And I said, really? I'd be happy to. And so I spent all spring and I worked on that. And she gave me her instrumentation. And it was very challenging instrumentation to write for. So I wrote for her needs first and then fleshed it out. And it came out great. I'm really, really proud of that. But the idea was because of the instrumentation, it was grade 2, 2.5. I think I played it for you and you made some comments about, you think about the clarinet break here. But yeah, the idea that if you've been tasked with like, here's where it needs to be. Don't make it harder because you don't know how to make it. Don't make it too hard because that's where you're thinking.
Mhm.
You have to change what you're thinking to
Mhm.
match the, you know, the consumer. And I think I've done a decent job of changing my mindset over the years. You know, you showed me some of the things on the list. The later chart. Most of those charts, actually, I think the only really kind of involved one is I Talked to Clark, which has a story behind it. But yeah, just don't write for you, write for them.
And when was the last time you worked on something with kids where you just heard a piece of music and you said, wow, that's far too simple? Like
Never.
I don't
Yeah.
remember ever hearing that. I'm like, wow, that's gorgeous, or
Right.
that's great, or
Yeah.
that sounds awesome. Now it might be, if you have a grade 5 band and it's a grade 1 reading chart, that might be good to use as sight reading on a gig, or just throw in for community, or just to
Sure.
study the genre. So
Good performance transcends any difficulty. That it absolutely. Your quote of simple music is good music, or
Yeah.
soft. It just yes. I mean, I think musicianship first. And so again, to circle back to the, you know, the 28-year-old version of myself writing a chart with high Fs in the trumpet part and, you know, 100 miles an hour. Yeah, okay, that's great, but who's that serving? You know, I mean, there occasionally I'll write something just because I really like, you know, I could do something with this. And if I do that, I'll do it for the PJO.
Yeah, it's for a pro group.
Yes, exactly it.
I mean, if the airman of note ask you to write something, you're gonna.
Oh yeah, and then it's like, that's awesome because that's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's this quote, and I don't know where I got it from, but I think it was Don Stratton. Don't write stuff you can't play. You know, and so for me, that's a big basket right there. I like lead trumpet parts now. It's really coming down. I don't know if on the microphone it's that sensitive.
No,
but yeah,
it's fine.
So yeah, I mean that informs. You know, since I kind of messed my face up years ago, I don't write anything that's like terribly demanding in the lead trumpet part. But that's also part of why the stuff is more playable and accessible, is just because more people can.
I forget who told me this. It might have been John Furman or somebody else, but like, you don't need more than high D, like, or high C, like that'll do you right there.
Yep. Yeah, and as you know, I mean, there are other factors too, but like in Alfred's book, the thing that moves it from 3 to say 3.5 is if there's a high B in the trumpet part. Their written A, concert G, is like, that's the cutoff. You know, every once in a while, like I'll buy a Gordon Goodwin grade 3 chart that's loaded with B's in it. I'm like, well, I guess if you're Gordon Goodwin, you can break that barrier, but you know, nothing beyond that. You know, so in answer to you, John Mastriani, great Connecticut band director, UConn. He asked, he's going to do a middle school festival, so he asked of my repertoire what would be doable at the middle school level, and I think so I sent him a list of like what I thought would be good for that level. I don't know if vending machine isn't broke, the light just don't work.
Do we have access to that?
That's on the.
So let's do that one first.
Okay,
we'll just add it. Is that on YouTube?
It is on YouTube. It's a Barnhouse thing.
So tell us about vending machine.
It's a straight eighth piece. It's a rock piece. You know, we might have said years ago. Almost always I struggle for titles, and sometimes I write the tune when the title's already been given to me. And we were at a trip. It was after you graduated. It was sometime in the early 2000s. We were at a hotel in Millinocket, and there was a sign on the vending machine. The kids had evidently put in money and got rejected or whatever. So they went to the desk, and the woman came back out and posted the sign, and it was like in totally broken English: vending machine isn't broke. The light just don't work. And they just thought that was the funniest thing. And they said, Mr. Skeffington, you have to write a chart with this as the title. And so anyway, I wrote it. I wrote it for.
Wasn't it for Gene Quinn?
I wrote it for me first, and then I brought it to PJO. And then eventually I did a same version of that chart, but in B flat, because the first version was in C. And then sent it to Barnhouse, and they took it. But it's same thing, you know, like I'm a big believer now, like if you can't listen to something, like I love Maria Schneider's music, but I struggle with like the through composed, like you hear the idea once and you might not hear that idea again. Mostly because I'm just not that smart. I just don't have the attention, you know, but if you can whistle a melody
Yeah.
and then you like develop that melody and then come back to it, there's something to hang your hat on.
But you guys did a slamming version of Pretty Road. So
We
I mean,
did.
you've done it.
And for the record, that Maria chart was more in that vein.
Yeah.
You could whistle, you could hum that melody when you walked away from it.
Yeah.
So I think most of the things that I do now have to have some sort of melodic content that
Yeah.
you can have an earworm
Yeah.
for better or worse. So the vending machine thing, and the point of this is that I think vending machine in their catalog is like medium advanced, at least medium. And in my mind, medium advanced is definitely a high school chart.
Yeah.
I did it with an honors district festival in Massachusetts for 7th and 8th grade.
Yeah.
They killed it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we get really typeset by numbers.
Yeah.
And like, oh, that's a middle school chart. That's a, you know, most middle school kids aren't going to tackle a grade 4, but it depends on why the chart is a grade 4. Like if it's a high E, don't ask middle school kids to do that. That's
Right.
just, that's not right. But, you know, if it's like a depth of rhythmic understanding, well, you just work on teaching 16th note subdivision. I mean, use it as a teaching tool. So that I have 3 in with Barnhouse, and I that's one of my favorites.
All right. Well, let's listen to that one first. The vending
Okay.
machine.
Vending machine isn't broke. The light just don't work.
Okay. The next chart we're going to listen to. Actually, we don't have this on here at all because I think it maybe there wasn't a YouTube video of or whatever. But one of my favorite charts of yours is the Molly March, and so we're not going to listen to it. But if people are looking for a cool like second line / funkish kind of thing, Molly March is really cool. So
thank you. Named after my daughter Molly. I joke, it's the only chart I've ever written that I had to pay to do. I did it as a graduate what are they project like self-design thing for the master's program. And so I asked Chris Oberholzer, you know, can I just write a chart? And he said, that's great. So I wrote the chart, brought it in, and it was like a $600 master's degree credit. So anyway, yeah, second line. And again, you can, because you've done the chart, there's not much to the melody. But you can absolutely hum it, and it follows you. And on the shout course on the way out, in fact, so that got played at Midwest. A band in California, Los Cerritos, played it, and started a friendship with California band directors out there. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is such a great program that they could do
Yeah.
this, you know? So, and again, if it's not really, don't let the range thing be like the be all end all, because the music can still be really good without that.
Yeah.
So, and that I don't, because you do some writing. I try not to do another medium swing. Next one, I'll do another medium swing.
Yeah.
I try to do a ballad and maybe a Latin tune, and just to force myself to write something
Yeah.
in a different genre.
Yeah. Okay, but the next chart we're actually going to listen to is Trofeo de Bolos. So this is sort of your most popular chart, and it still sells great.
It does. One of the great, I'm just so thrilled. Like somebody reaches out from Wyoming and says, "Hey, we're playing your music." It's like, once it leaves, you hit send. You have no idea who's going to play this, you know. And
it's similar to a podcast. You put it out, and you're like,
it's exactly
who knows who's going to listen to it.
So the first time I got a royalty check, I read it and I was like, I was dumbfounded that somebody paid me, you know, to do, because otherwise it just sits on your computer and you know, you get to use it when you decide, but that might be once every 2 years or whatever. So I wrote that for Old Town, you know, Jeff Priest, we had mentioned, Hall of Fame, Jeff and Cheyenne Wheeler, great friends of mine. And you know the story, but so the whole, it was a Spanish class. This is going to sound like a weird segue. And the kids were tasked with going around to various things in the school and labeling with a sticky pad, like what that name of that object was in Spanish. Well, one of the great jokes we have as music educators, that was a Norm Richardson thing. The bowling trophy ruled everything, right? So we were going to go to compete for the bowling trophy, and Norm was a visionary because he like could care less, but so everything was the bowling trophy. So they had said that to the kids. So like, don't focus on the trophy, focus on your performance. So the percussionist named the water cooler, oh no, the trophy cabinet, it was Trofeo de Bolos, which is like, you know, sort of pig Latin for bowling trophy. I think in actual translation, it's nothing like that. But anyway, so this sort of made up title, she actually emailed me and said, my kids just did this. I think it's the funniest thing in the world. Would you write a chart for it?
Yeah.
And, you know, so Trofeo de Bolos, bum, bum, bee, bum, bum, bee, bum, 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 stuff that you get, that you hear, that stays with you. You know, it's like, to be a writer, you have to listen to a lot of music of different styles. I was on the Seacoast band, and we played with the great Bob Mintzer. And Bob had a solo out in front of the tune. And I remember, because it was like, it's hard to remember somebody's solo note for note, but I was so taken back because he was just bum, bum, bee, bum, bum, ba-doo-be-dum, bum, bee. He was doing this riff, which is nothing more than just arpeggiating whatever. And that stuck with me, maybe more for the rhythm than anything else. So when Shai asked, it was within days of having the show with Bob Mintzer. And I started fooling around with that. And at first it was major, and then it was minor, and I went to bed and I came back. But when I came up with a melody, I'm like, oh, okay. And then the next time that can be the A section, next A will be played by somebody else. And so the thing sort of blew up into a chart. So when I finished it and sent it, they loved it, you know, and it's not particularly hard. You've done it before, I think. But it's hard enough.
Yep.
You know, there's some meat in the fourth trombone player. You know, everybody's got to do something. So I need to look at that.
Unless you cut it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another word to the wise on that chart is don't play it too fast.
Yes. I think people not undereducated, but unappreciative of the idiom in Latin music. There's bum, bum, bee, bum, bum, bum. There's like a point, the saying is, don't write checks you can't cash, right? And so, and the other thing is, even if your kids technically can play it that fast, it doesn't groove. It doesn't sound right. So Trofeos continues. This was 2007. I remember when I sent it in, and I hadn't had many things in, and Pete Barenbreg, the editor at Alfred, emailed and said, this is great. It's the last slot. We're getting ready to close up, and we're going to do the recording session. It was kind of late fall, early winter. And I was like, I reread it like 4 or 5 times. Like, did this really just happen? So it continues to sell now, you know, which is, you know, so the royalty checks. So this is sort of funny, but it's a little bit like even Amway or whatever. It's like you have somebody and the product's great and other people sell and but everything is sort of like kind of builds on itself. So if you have one or two charts out and people like, and Skeffington's a recognizable name, they're like, I remember that chart. They might go in and see what else you've done. So if you're out of the game or just starting, you don't have any, any reputation to bank on. So they give you your sales sheet, like what is put. So I've got, I think 12 things in with Alfred, and some of the older stuff continues to sell. Like people still buy that. So, the last royalty check, I mean, I still have the same thing. Like, wow, I get paid to do this. It's almost like
you've done the work, haven't done it in years on that, but it's still doing.
It's a complete afterthought, and I don't live that way. I get to once a year when I get my royalty checks from whoever, but and it always hits me that same way. It's like free money, thank God I'm not doing it for a living, because it would be a different story.
All right, let's listen to it. Trofeo de Bolos. Okay, the next chart we're going to listen to is also one of your more popular charts, right? The ballad on When I Fall in Love.
Some of the charts there, like later, I talked to Clark, but especially this one, I did at a much harder level. So ages ago in the 90s, Jeff Priest's band, I did it for him. And it started off with this big trombone chorale at the beginning. It was higher and windier. Lead trumpet part was high, everything. And it was basically the same chart, but just written for Jeff's band. Was really, as you know, that he's had some great bands. But once you write that, it's not really usable unless you can bring it to another band that's got like that same skill set. So I think in the winter I didn't have anything to do. It was like no great pressing, projects to work on. So I started work on sort of revoicing that and made it more accessible. Obviously the melody is timeless. Changed the ending, the last chord still is like, that's, because it's almost not in keeping, but I didn't really think that. I just thought it caught my ear. And Pete said, this is great. We'd love to take this. And sort of like Trofeo, I still see it gets published. I mean, it's purchased, it gets programmed a bunch. So I think, well, at the very least, people are enjoying it. So,
but there's something with the tempo changes in the recording we're going to listen to that you'd like to set the record straight on.
That's right. We had a conversation about that. It's funny what you say, what you mean, and what gets translated in life, but also in music, especially. How many times have we bought a chart and listened and said, that's wrong, or they missed this, or like, can we start at 37? Wait, I think I only have 7 measures. So in the proofing process, the parts aren't always accurate. Well, and When I Fall in Love, it goes into boom, bum, bum, goes in the double time. I think sometimes people see double time and they go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, which makes no sense at all.
It's just double of the
It's
ballad
exactly
tempo.
what it is. So as long as you set the ballad tempo straight, the double time is just a lazy swing feel. Well, coming out of it, and I even spelled it out on the chart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, bum, 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 and 2 and 3. So it's a metric modulation, and it says right over the top, feels like sixteenths and 4E and a 1. So, and I've done it with groups, and once you explain, oh, it's great. And once they understand that analogy on the recording, va do da, grand pause, vum vum vim vum va, and what? I almost drove off the road the first time I heard it. I was like somebody recomposing something, and that's just like in the studio. And in fairness to them, they probably had 50 charts to record that.
Right.
Day. So that's what ended up happening. And so I've been on many jazz festivals, at district honors, sometimes all state state jazz festivals, and I'll hear them, and I've judged with Terry on a lot of them, and he'll look over and he'll like wondering because he knows like that whole thing with the ending, and you can tell who's listened to the source material because that's how they do it. So it's just funny. It's telephone. I tell you something, you tell them, they tell them, and by the time it comes back, it's completely changed from what you started it with, and that's kind of anyway.
So like that's a double-edged sword because we always say listen to recordings, try to copy recordings, especially in a jazz idiom, we're aiming to swing like the recording and all that. And so I mean, you see why. I mean, to be honest, I'd probably do it that way because like that's so
that would be one of those things like you'd have to be a pretty secure band director, like knowing the idiom, thinking that doesn't make any sense. This is what it is.
I mean, if I was doing it, I'd probably have you over for a session and you'd straighten us out before a concert comes up. But
well, and it's funny too because when I watered it down, but what I did is made it more appropriate. There's a lick in there before it's like a sort of a pseudo double time lick, but in the ballad tempo, sort of insinuating that we're going to be going there. And the editor said that's like way too hip. That'll never work. So it turned into va do vo di va da vo di va do da. And so anyway, I begrudgingly changed it because he said I had to, but anyway.
All right, let's listen to it. Here's When I Fall in Love. next chart I want to talk about was your newer chart called I Talked to Clark. And I mean, the stories are great and the chart is great, but just the thought of Clark Terry, I think, is something that for jazz education is underappreciated. I
Mhm.
mean, I think he's still an icon to people who understand the idiom,
Mhm.
but there's many people who know Miles Davis and Lee Morgan and Chet Baker and all this, but like don't know Clark Terry.
Yeah.
When like literally Clark was the mentor, and then but because he didn't die in a spectacular manner, you know, early in his life or something like that,
Yeah.
like a lot of people don't have the respect for his music and his life. Maybe they don't mean it, they just don't know.
Right.
So the fact that, again, I've always said to Terry and other people, like there needs to be more Clark Terry charts out there.
I agree.
That you just we need to have access to that. Doing that at a young band level is harder for sure because his stuff isn't always accessible
Yeah.
there. But so that's one reason why I loved it, and I love the, you know, we have a mutual friend in Dave Seiler who just like always mixes up his words, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like, tell us a story about
Okay.
that. I talked to Clark.
This is a great one, and it was not really meant to be a Clark legacy chart. It was just Nate Jorgensen, great band director at UNH, who you know, asked me to write a chart for David Seiler. And David is the patriarch of New England jazz and has been for the last 50 plus years. Dave had a long-standing relationship with Clark and the UNH Jazz Festival, and had Clark in, as you know, because you had Clark as a guest several times, right?
Many times.
So Dave, so in and amongst that, Dave was famous for, he was one of the more quotable people on the face of the planet. And there's a list floating around with hundreds and hundreds of Dave's quotes that people wrote down. I just think that's such a tribute to the legacy. Is anyway.
We'll burn that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. Yeah.
So the quote was, I talked to Clark last night. He talked my arm off. So meaning like in the old Rotary days, like you had your arm. It's like, and it was just that, but that's like such a Seiler thing to say. So I wrote, that was the entire title when I submitted it. And actually Barnhouse said, that's way too long. You got to change it. So it was changed to I Talked to Clark.
Yeah.
And the whole Clark significance thing, I wanted to do something that was sort of like more straight ahead with like typical key area changes, but allowed for like open blowing and improv, probably more than any other chart, because Clark was a soloist. And it's kind of, without copying entirely, it's the first, the minor section of, oh, this is awful.
One of Clark's tunes.
Yeah, it's not a Clark tune. It's Autumn Leaves. Okay. So it's the minor section, and then it goes to a bridge, which is unrelated, but it was heavily influenced by just like a real book tune, a standard tune. And so I did the head, did the background. I'm like, boy, I really like that. That really works. And so I did the blowing section, you know, opened it up, copied the changes in, wrote some good backgrounds. And then I'm like, where am I going to go from here? Because, you know, typically it's like intro, head, solo section, development of some kind.
You didn't have the full picture in mind.
Then it dawned on me. So I talked to Clark. So I went on a pilgrimage, and I found as many Clark Terry solos that were out there in the universe that were transcribed. And I listened to them, and I'm like, this is a typical, there's a which I can't play. This is like, but
and his solos always sound easier than they are.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I know that and I love it. You see the music and you're like, oh,
yeah,
damn.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly it. So I knitted a 32 bar soli with all these quotes. They weren't quotes, they were direct, like he played this.
Right.
And then I attached it to something else where he played this, and it wasn't even from the same solo, but it was over the same set of chord changes. That's or sometimes cool. Not. I had to transpose it because I liked the line. And I knitted a solo together of, it's sort of like we were talking about AI. You input all this data in AI. So this is something I put together.
You were the AI.
I was the AI, which is an interesting comment in and of itself. So, and that's the Clark, you know, connection to that. And I was actually thinking about maybe doing that this year. I haven't done it with my own kids. Yeah. And you say new chart, that's actually, it's funny, you get older, it's like nothing is new anymore. I think I did that like, it was before COVID. So it was at least 4 years. It was well before COVID. So it's probably 6 or 7 years now it's been out. So, and that's another Barnhouse one. Yeah. But that one's probably grade 4 again, no high notes in it. I think there might be a high C, like just passing, mostly like concert G, A for the trumpet. But the thing at the unison solely, first alto to fourth trombone, you're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's an adventure.
Do they have the ability, if they're doing this chart, but like half their horns could play it, to make it a solely for some kids and not all of them?
But so I'll answer your question with another question. Doesn't everybody have that ability? Right. So it depends on the band director to look at that and say,
Mhm.
okay, great. Lay out for these 8 bars.
Right.
Come in here. We're going to X these notes out. So, I mean, over time, you figure out how can I make this chart more playable.
Yep.
For it's not the kid doesn't practice or do whatever. It's just it's a hard line.
Yeah. Not
You know,
everybody's an all-state level player or
That's
whatever.
exactly it. So, you know, the goal is we're going to work on it slow. You know, my thing about rehearsal was always you make a game of it. So you figure out because you need reps, you need muscle memory. So, but people like tune out after you do it too much. So you make a game of it. Like you Barry and fourth trumpet, like whatever you're going to play. And it's like, oh, no one who knows who they're going to be paired with.
Mhm.
So but you use what we said, you know, earlier in the session, enjoy the journey.
Mhm.
You know, so when you eventually perform it, well, if you know, do what you could do, but the journey is let's all try to work it out because it's good technique. You know, so that one in terms of like a legacy, I've been fortunate. I've actually did 3 things that were commissioned in honor of Seiler. Emergency Stopping Only was a Seiler commission, and I think Reverse of the Curse, one of those ones that, yeah, I think that was that one, was again commissioned by various people, but in honor of David. So that says something right there. I mean, most people are lucky to have anything commissioned for them, and Dave's had 3 just from me alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hugely important.
All right, here it is. I talked to Clark. Okay, the next chart we're going to listen to is called Later.
So this is actually tied with Trofeo. When I got Trofeo in, it became really popular. And I had a couple when I fell in love. We talked about Naima was sold well. I took it upon myself. I did a chart on Soon. It's a beautiful chart, beautiful tune. So I did an arrangement like it's almost like Instant Jazz Band, Just Add Water. I'm like, this is going to be a instant hit. Well, as it turned out, because it's a Gershwin piece, Alfred didn't have the rights to it. And they said, well, we can't take it. So I did all this work, but I soon got over myself and just said, so I would clinic other bands, and I would bring copies. I would just give it away for free. And she said, it's great. but like any arrangement, if you stop back and you assess like how much was the composer's intent and how much was the arranger's intent. An intro, which I really liked, unrelated to the source material of the tune, and then the melody. So the sax soli, the shout chorus, the intro, the outro, if you did the sum parts, it's probably 85% my writing over the chord changes of, the tune. And chord changes are not copyrighted.
Right.
So it's the melody. So I was like, well, I'll try this. And I just had this idea fairly recently, like within maybe past COVID. I erased all the melody, but kept everything else. And it was a little hard at first because you just have soon in your ear and you can't. So I eventually came up with a melody replacing, and then, but if you know the chart, like they did it at, what's the Band Directors Academy? They have it, the NHBDA. So they read later, and Jim Robbins, who's on the Seacoast Band, he's on PJO. We play soon. You've played it before. He laughed out loud and like called me. He says like, it's the same chart. And like, it is. Now, the shame of that is just for the licensing of that, we denied like a whole, like people should know that melody.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. It's like do tunes, do A Train in the original key. So kids have to learn it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Anyway. So I had to play that game, but anyway, so this is cool medium swing chart. And anyway, so based on soon and eminently playable. And again, it's another one I was thinking about doing with my kids for next year. So
all right, let's listen to it. Here's Later. wanted to segue on something you just said, playing A Train in the right key.
Mhm.
So here's a classic thing. Mike Sweeney has a great grade 1.5 chart on Take the A Train.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've heard it. It's a just
I haven't,
standard.
but
It's brilliantly done.
Yeah.
It's in B flat, of course.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do it in C. So I actually bought it. And then what I did was I put the entire thing in Sibelius
Yeah.
and just put it up a step.
Sure.
So we have a gig for a community with like little rehearsal, but then a concert session afterwards. So the kids have both charts. We're going to quickly do the B flat chart. And then we're going to spend the fall as one of the charts is going to be the C version of the chart.
Okay.
So that's a classic thing. Like if you've got a good band and you're looking for A Train in C, that's not too hard. That's what I did. And it worked well.
Yeah. And it's A Train such a good tune because there's like certain key areas that hang out for a while that, everyone wants to know, can you give me the scale? Like there's this magic one set of notes that will fit over everything.
Yep.
So it forces you to sort of get in that land of like the key of the moment. So
what he does in that chart in the solo section, if I remember correctly, is like there's lots of band and then solo for 4 bars and then band and solo for 4 bars. So he kind of strategically, doesn't force a kid to play a long time in it.
Yep.
So okay, so the next tune we're going to do is Tones for Doan. If people don't know Don Doan, legendary musician, especially in our area, but throughout the jazz world.
Sure. Yeah. Sort of like Dave Seiler, but on a more global level.
Yep.
Donnie was a trombone player went to South Portland High School. I think graduated in like the late 40s or early 50s, then went to BU on a basketball scholarship, I believe. But all the while, just an absolute maniacal trombone player, just known for his work ethic. So, and a patriarch of Maine jazz, certainly all those years, had a band that predated the Terry White Big Band, which eventually then became the Portland Jazz Orchestra. So I wanted to just, again, in sitting down, like writers, I do a fair amount of like playing chord changes, whatnot. And if something comes to me, great. If not, I just close the cover and go do something else. I came up with a melody and I was kind of, all right, so I figured it out. I had Donnie's grandson in my band, so I had a Doan connection. So I thought this would be, obviously Tones for Doan. It doesn't take a genius. You rhymed, good. But that's probably the one that I have that's like more middle school appropriate than almost anything else. I think it's listed as maybe a 2.5, but the same sort of sensibility. You hum the melody, it sticks with you. The chart is absolutely playable. Yeah, I didn't price anyone out of the market because the trumpet goes to high C. Nope, I don't think the trumpet part goes out of the staff. But cool, you can substitute difficulty with like harmonic variation. Like all of a sudden that becomes like the selling point rather than like the glory note at the end. So anyway, that was submitted, and I think at that point I'm super appreciative that I'm with any publisher, but started with Chose, and then they committed to like a younger grade level, only grades 1 and 2, and then I had the series of things with Alfred, and then Barnhouse, and now Kendor, and I can send anything to anyone at one time, but most of my stuff recently has been with Kendor. And Blair Bilowski is great. He's like, I think he took that, or maybe it was somebody else before, but they've been, really cool about this is great. We'll take this. I have another one coming out that escalated quickly. And the one that Terry and I co-wrote together for Allstate.
For Michelle.
Yeah. So anyway,
super cool.
Tones for Doan.
All right, here it is. Okay, so we have one more chart to listen to, which is one of the best titles that is out there. But first, I want to talk about a little bit of advice that you might have that might come to mind if you were to be able to tell your younger self something is a way to think of it, or maybe, advice you might have for people who would ask you, they're getting into the profession. We were just talking about running a marching band rehearsal. And of course, I have a marching band rehearsal today and it's currently pouring. So we're planning on being indoors as much as we have to. We talked about, okay, you have an 6 hour rehearsal. Do you use all six inside, or do you say, okay, we're inside, we don't have the facility that maybe would make it really beneficial, so let's turn it into a 3 hour rehearsal?
Mhm.
And so there's things that like your younger self might say, yeah, no, we're never doing that because of X, Y, and Z. And so that just sort of made me think of that. Like any other advice, people driving down the road right now who might.
That's a brilliant question. This is awful because the only thing that solves that is experience, and equate experience to age. When I was a younger teacher, we were going till 8 because the schedule said we were going to 8, and that was the expectation. The older I've gotten, I realize, well, I call the shots. So if I don't really think it's in the best interest, what's the government work? If you tell them it takes a week, they'll take a week. You tell them it needs to be done in 2 days, it'd be done in 2 days. So regardless, I mean, what are you going to work on? Okay, set an agenda. This is what we want to get better on, these 3 things.
This is what the kids can handle. And
yeah, this is what we did. And there's a lot of diminishing returns, right? With brass players, it's like you're beating a dead horse at that point. So
right.
get done what you can get done. Assess, okay, let's turn around, let's work on memorizing. Saxes, let me hear you. Saxes and mellophones play together. Great. So you're surreptitiously, you're kind of resting the tuba brass section back there. Great. Now we come back in. So if you bounce around, but even managing your time well, there's still a point where like it's saturation, right?
Yeah.
So rehearsals like that are meant to be like, we're going to do this, we're going to take a break, we're going to go outside and do basic block, then we're going to teach new sets. So if it all becomes like one thing, and this can be concert band too, or whatever idiom. I mean, I think you need to find out where that level is. It's like, okay, they're starting to tune out. Even the good kids are like looking around.
Yeah. And well, you're coming from a place of, like we said earlier in the podcast, of like, you work hard, your program works hard, your kids work hard. That's the expectation. We're not saying this to a younger teacher who comes in that says, well, anytime you have a cold, you need to cancel rehearsal.
Oh, goodness.
Like, so there's that. You have to find that line between knowing you're doing what's best for your program in the long term while also thinking short term.
Well, so. You're not going to fix it all tonight. We're so behind on whatever. That's, that may or may not be true. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or you have bad kids. It's just, that's where you are.
For us personally too, we knew this day was coming. So we planned 2 days ago, we hammered more drill and we didn't have music for all of that, which is a whole other thing, which is fine.
You're an experienced teacher and you're kind of reading the tea leaves. Yeah. Like this is where
we know that today we're going to get more. And then Friday we'll be in the same spot we would have been, assuming we have weather. So
we start next week. You started this week, Monday and Tuesday. The first 2 productions are all printed. We'll just get after it. Drumline will be here, pit will be there, guard will be out. So we're going to be hampered for the same thing that I think everybody is with facility. It's ideal if I had the run of the whole place, that would be something. So you just have to, you deal with the cards that you're dealt, right? But to wrap that up, put a bow on it. I just think, have a sense of like what you want to get accomplished. If you can get it accomplished in a shorter amount of time, there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that you did actually get it accomplished, right? So
great. All right. So the final title is
Wombat Combat. So it's like the Clark thing or the Trofeo de Bolas. They all come with like, the title is like
a story.
Odd. We're on a bus ride and we're coming back, and somehow I'm sitting up front, the kids are in the back, and the game was some weird saying that you could say out loud. And so I forget who said what preceded it, but somebody said Wombat Combat. And we all broke up because it was just like hysterical. And I said, that needs to be a song title. And I remember that the girl, Laura Patriquin, she was our drum major. She's just a brilliant girl. So I wrote a piece called Wombat Combat. Initially it was I wrote it for Kevin Knapp. He was teaching at Belchertown, Mass. And he actually wanted to change the title. And I'm like, no. So the tune is the tune. I'll write you another tune, but Wombat Combat stays. So it's a minor blues, but with like a twist, so it goes to the 4 chord.
Isn't it kind of shuffly?
It's it's like a swing shuffle. It's kind of up tempo. It's another one of those charts that sounds remarkably harder than it actually is.
Yep.
But it's got another one of those solis in the middle. And it's funny, the chart evolved before I sent it for publication. It was head, intro, head, solo, and then out with some development. And at some point, I programmed it with my high school kids. And you reach that wall where you're like, you wonder when you come to the rehearsal that day, what are we going to work on? It already sounds pretty good. So I think it was a Bruins game, maybe a Celtics game, because it was in the middle of the winter. I just sat down and I wrote a soli, and I cut everybody out. It's wins alone. And anyway, so it's not the unison one, like everything is sort of integrated and just produce or else.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's funny how charts morph together. Like that was the first iteration, wasn't the version that
we'll make sure we include that soli in the recording.
Yeah.
So people can hear that.
Yeah. So Wombat Combat.
And another question I had, just like it just sparked me. I know we're kind of closing here, but so say somebody got that chart, they really want to do it. And this is your opinion as a composer. They really want to do it, but for some reason they can't do the soli, or they want to cut another full chorus from something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at what point is that acceptable? You're making it work for your students. At what point is it just, it really follows the intention of the music and the composer?
I think I know exactly what you're saying, because we all do that.
You don't want to offend the composer, but you want to make it work for your kids.
No, you should not be inserting your own. Yeah, I don't like that minor chord. I'm going to make it major there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's if you cross a line when you do that too often. But I mean, if we're softening the demand level to make it more accessible for a wider amount of kids, I think that's just educationally sound.
And if people don't know how to do that, there's probably band directors in your life that that you can reach out to, and they can help you with that.
Absolutely.
And if not, reach out to us. And
I've had people like, because this is the cool thing about we were talking about websites. I used to have a web page, but because I'm a technological doofus, I wasn't able to keep it together. But I have a site on Pepper. I have a site on Barnhouse, Kendor, like all these places. Barnhouse in particular has a Reach the Composer tag. Mm-hmm. And so I've had a lot of people reach out about, it's just funny, they've reached out about charts with Alfred or Kendor, but they found me on the Barnhouse one. And Barnhouse has been great. They just forwarded it to me, and ostensibly their questions about like what you just asked.
Yeah.
Would it be okay to change this, or sometimes they even like, give me a call, we'll talk about it.
Yep.
And I've had conversations with band directors I don't know.
You'll talk with us? That's great.
I know.
That's super cool.
And I was just thinking how the younger version of myself, which is a question you've asked a couple of times, I look back now and that I've got 25 or so charts that are published. When I was first starting, I was like, to get published would be like the be all end all. And now it's like,
but you have infinitely more, like Terry's the same way,
yes,
that are sitting on a computer or one of 7 computers or hard drives that are probably equally as good charts that just for whatever reason were not picked up.
Right.
So if people like your charts, but maybe want to find something else that's not what's available, they could reach out to you.
Sure.
And you could.
Yeah. There's funny because I'm waiting, as we talk about it all the time. I'm nearing the end of my career, a couple more years. When I'm done, the thing I think I'd like to do is like fix up my studio, make it like a real thing, and just start working on like technique stuff that I can put out there for band.
Helping writers. Or helping like band stuff,
concert band stuff, jazz band stuff, just writing and just like. But Hal Leonard and Pepper, I think they're somehow together with it. They have the Arrange Me page and My Score. So My Score, you can put up stuff that unpublished, and the money. I'm sure you probably know, like the standard published chart thing. If you wrote the charts an original, you get 10%. If it's an arrangement, When I Fall in Love, Naima, you get 5%. Now that's almost like on the surface, you're like, oh my God, they're just taking advantage of you. Well, they're doing all of the work. No one would know me from a hole in the wall if it weren't for the publicity that I got from those companies. So, but with the Arrange Me thing, a score that's like 50-50. which is amazing that you got to send it to them. They have to copyright it for you. But anyway, so that's a whole nother avenue to sell your music and to get your music into a wider audience. So, it'll be stuff like that I tackle when I have the time. And I'm not worried about planning for a marching band rehearsal in the rain.
Well, this has been fun. Thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Here is Wombat Combat.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.